Light raindrops were hitting the window while CreepsMcCoasta was sitting in front of his computer in his room. It was almost 2 in the morning. This was the time when the whole city would have been asleep, but CreepsMcCoasta loved to stay up at night and search for strange stories on the internet. That night, he was still browsing various forums and old websites when suddenly a new email appeared on his screen. Subject: Don't open the red door. The sender's name was missing. There was only an empty email address. CreepsMcCoasta opened the email with a slight smile. He thought it might be a joke or spam. But inside there was only one sentence. If you want to live, don't open the red door. A picture was attached below. The picture was of an old house. The house looked deserted. The windows were broken, and a strange red door was visible in front. CreepsMcCoasta zoomed in on the picture. Someone had written a number in black on the door. 13. He laughed. People are weird too. He closed the email, but a few seconds later, the notification came again. From the same email address. This time, it only said one sentence. You've seen the picture. Now he's seeing you too. CreepsMcCoasta frowned. This was starting to seem less funny and more strange. He wrote in response. Who are you? He pressed send, but the answer came immediately. It's too late. With it was another picture. CreepsMcCoasta opened the picture, and his heart stopped for a moment. It was a picture of his own house. It was exactly the same angle as if someone was standing outside and taking a picture. He immediately looked out the window. The street was deserted. The rain had picked up. No one was in sight. He consoled himself. Maybe it's Photoshop, but somewhere inside, fear had arisen. It was about 3 in the morning. CreepsMcCoasta turned off the computer and tried to sleep. But sleep was not coming. That red door kept going around in his mind. Suddenly, tap. A voice came from outside the room. He opened his eyes. Silence. A few moments later, the voice came again. Tap, tap. As if someone was knocking on the main door of the house. CreepsMcCoasta got out of bed. There was no one else in the house. He slowly started to descend the stairs. The knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. The closer he got to the door, the clearer the sound became. Finally, he reached the door. He grabbed the handle. But before opening it, he peered out through the small glass of the door. There was no one. Absolutely no one. The knocking stopped suddenly. He breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was an illusion. He started to turn back. Just then, a white envelope slid in from under the door. CreepsMcCoasta's blood froze. He stood there for a few moments. Then he plucked up the courage and picked up the envelope. There was only one word written on it. Run. Inside was a picture. The same red door. But this time the door was open. And inside was complete darkness. Behind a picture was a sentence. He's awake now. The next morning, CreepsMcCoasta decided to investigate the matter. He searched the internet for the picture. After a while, he found an old blog. The blog was about 10 years old. Its title was The Red Door Incident. A chill ran through CreepsMcCoasta's body as he read the article. It said that there was an old house in a remote town. People said there was a red door. Whoever opened it disappeared a few days later. Never came back. Several police reports were filed, but no one could find out anything. At the end of the blog was a picture. The exact same picture he had received in the email. But the scariest thing was what was written below the picture. If you are looking at this picture, it is probably too late. CreepsMcCoasta closed the blog. He felt as if the temperature in the room had suddenly dropped. At that moment, a notification came on his phone. A message from an unknown number. The message only had a location. And it said, "Want to know the truth? Come tonight." CreepsMcCoasta opened the map. His breath stopped. The location was a desolate forest about 15 kilometers from his city. At that very location, that old house was there, with a red door in front of it. At that moment, his phone screen automatically turned off. And before it turned off, he saw his reflection for a moment. But he wasn't alone in the reflection. Someone was standing behind him, a long black shadow, whose eyes were completely white. It was 10:30 at night. CreepsMcCoasta was still sitting in his room, thinking about this strange incident. He was repeatedly checking the location on his phone that had been sent from an unknown number. Under normal circumstances, he would not have believed in such a thing. But what had happened in the past 24 hours had shaken all his logical thoughts. First, the mysterious emails, then the picture of his house, then the knock on the door at night, and finally the shadow that he had seen on the phone screen. All this could not be a coincidence. He felt that someone was deliberately pushing him towards a certain place. Finally, he made a decision. He would go to this location. No matter how terrible the truth was, he had to know it. At 11 p.m., CreepsMcCoasta got into his car and drove out of town. As he drove further, the roads became more deserted. The rain had started again. The wind was whistling strangely through the trees. The map on his phone was constantly leading him towards the forest. After about half an hour, the paved road ended. Now only a dirt trail remained. CreepsMcCoasta slowed down the car. A few minutes later, he reached a place where the road had completely ended. According to the map, the destination was still about a kilometer away. He had to walk the rest of the way. He took out his flashlight and entered the forest. There was thick darkness everywhere. The trees were so tall that even the moonlight could not reach the ground. Only the light from his flashlight could be seen a few steps ahead. After a while, he felt as if someone was following him. He stopped suddenly, but there was no one behind. Only trees. There was air and silence. He told himself that it was the effect of fear. Then he started to move forward. A few minutes later, he saw the first strange thing. On the trunk of a tree, there was a number written in black. 13. The exact same number as on the red door.
His heart started to beat faster.
He moved forward. Some distance away, there was another tree. It also had the same number on it. 13. Then another tree. Then another. As if someone was marking a path. Or maybe trying to get someone to a specific place. Suddenly, the forest began to end. The trees became fewer. And then CreepsMcCoasta reached an open field. He shone his flashlight in front of him. And there he stopped. That house really existed, exactly as it was in the pictures. Old, deserted, dilapidated, and in front of it, that red door. Despite the rain, its color looked strangely striking, as if someone had just painted it. CreepsMcCoasta stared at the house for a few moments. His heart was beating faster. He should have gone back, but it was too late now. He wanted to know the truth, and maybe that was the mistake. The main door of the house was half open. He pushed it carefully. The door creaked open. There was complete silence inside. Dust settled on the floor. There were traces of dampness on the walls. The room smelled of rotten wood and rot. But the strangest thing was that it seemed to him as if someone still lived here. As if the house was not completely empty. He kept going from one room to another. Everywhere was deserted. But suddenly, he heard a sound from the upper floor. Stop. Then silence. Stop. As if someone was walking slowly. CreepsMcCoasta's throat went dry. But he took courage and started climbing the stairs. When he reached the top, he saw a closed room. The door was half broken. It was dark inside. He shone the flashlight. In the middle of the room was a wooden table. And on this table lay an old diary. He picked up the diary. There was no name on its cover. Only one sentence was written. If you have come this far, you can't go back now. CreepsMcCoasta's hands trembled. He opened the first page. The diary belonged to someone who had come to this house about 15 years ago. The first pages were ordinary. But as he read on, the writing changed. The writing became irregular. The words became crooked. And the fear grew. On one page it was written, I have opened the red door. On the next page, he is watching me. Then, he comes to me in my dreams. And finally, for God's sake, don't let him in. The next page was stained with blood. On it was written only one word, run. At that moment, the door to the room slammed shut.
Bang.
CreepsMcCoasta jumped. He immediately looked back. The door had closed by itself. Then, he heard a sound from the other side of the room. A faint sound of breathing, as if someone was standing in the dark, watching him. CreepsMcCoasta turned the flashlight in that direction. At first, he couldn't see anything. Then, the light fell on a face. An inhuman face. Extremely tall.
Pale.
and eyes completely white. The same shadow that he had seen on the phone screen. For a few seconds, the two of them stared at each other. Then the creature's lips slowly began to open. There were no teeth in its mouth. There was only complete darkness. And then it made a sound that could not have been made by a human. CreepsMcCoasta ran screaming to the door. He grabbed the handle. He pushed. The door opened. He descended the stairs and reached the bottom. But when he reached the bottom, his steps stopped, because someone was now standing in front of the main door of the house. An old man, wet from the rain, dressed in black clothes. There was a strange fear in his eyes. The old man shouted as soon as he saw him. "Run!" CreepsMcCoasta was shocked. "Who are you?" The old man said in a trembling voice. "You woke him up." "Who?" The old man pointed upwards, where the creature was coming from. Then he said a sentence that sent a cold wave through CreepsMcCoasta's body. "The red door is not the real door. The real door is not open yet." At that moment, the whole house began to shake. Cracks began to form in the walls. The same inhuman scream was heard from above again, but this time much closer than before. The old man shouted, "Come with me if you want to live." CreepsMcCoasta looked up one last time, and his blood froze. At the top of the stairs stood the white-eyed creature, but he was no longer alone. Behind him, dozens of white eyes glowed in the darkness. The creature standing at the top of the stairs was silent. Its white eyes were shining in the darkness. But an even more terrifying sight was behind it. Dozens of white eyes, as if there was something else in the darkness. Something that didn't want to come into the light. The atmosphere in the room had become heavy. The air suddenly became cold. And then, the creature took a step forward. "Stop. Just one step." But its voice echoed throughout the house. "Run!" The old man shouted again. He grabbed CreepsMcCoasta's arm and ran towards the main door. The two came out into the rain. Strange shadows were moving in the windows of the house behind him, as if dozens of people were watching them from inside. CreepsMcCoasta gasped. "What is all this?" The old man didn't answer. He kept moving towards the forest. The rain had intensified. The trees were swaying in the wind, and a strange whisper could be heard everywhere, as if the forest itself was talking to them. About 10 minutes later, they stopped in front of a large stone. The same number was written on the stone, 13. The old man bent down and put his hand under the stone. Suddenly, the ground shifted slightly, and the stairs leading down appeared. CreepsMcCoasta was surprised. "What is this?" The old man looked at him for the first time. Fear was clearly visible in his eyes. "A place where you might find some answers." Both of them started to descend the stairs. It was completely dark below. Only the yellow light of the lantern in the old man's hand showed the way. After some time, they reached a long tunnel. Strange markings were made on the walls of the tunnel, some like humans, some like animals, and some that you couldn't even tell what they were by looking at them. CreepsMcCoasta pointed to a sign. "What are these pictures of?" The old man was silent for a moment. Then he said, "These are not pictures. These are records of things that live on the other side of the door." CreepsMcCoasta's heart beat fast. "On the other side of the door?" The old man shook his head. "A door was opened here thousands of years ago. A door that was between our world and another world." "Which world?" The old man's voice trembled. "A world where there is no light, where there is no time, where they live." CreepsMcCoasta immediately asked, "Who are they?" The old man continued walking instead of answering. After a long time, they arrived at a large underground hall. And seeing what was there, CreepsMcCoasta's step stopped. In the middle of the hall was a huge door, at least 50 feet high, made of black stone. Thousands of strange symbols were carved on it, and in the middle of it was a red circle, exactly the same red color as the door of that deserted house. "This," CreepsMcCoasta could barely speak. "Is this the real door?" The old man nodded in agreement. "Yes. That house was just a symbol. The real door has always been here." Suddenly, CreepsMcCoasta remembered something. "Who are you?" A strange sadness appeared on the old man's face. After a long silence, he spoke. My name is Edward, and I went to this house 15 years ago. CreepsMcCoasta almost dropped the flashlight.
What?
That diary, Edward said softly. It was mine. The room fell silent. But you're alive. Edward smiled slightly, but there was no joy in that smile. Only exhaustion. Sometimes being alive is scarier than being dead. CreepsMcCoasta was about to say something when suddenly the ground shook. First there was a slight jolt, then another, then a third. The big black door began to tremble slowly. Edward's face flushed. No. A low voice came from the other side of the door. Knock. Then again. Knock. As if someone was knocking from the other side. CreepsMcCoasta's throat went dry. What is this? Edward's eyes were fixed on the door. They want to come in. At that moment, black smoke began to rise from a crack in the door. And then, a hand reached out. Not a human hand. Very long, unusually thin, and completely black. CreepsMcCoasta backed away in fear. A voice came from the other side of the door. A voice that sounded like thousands of people speaking at once. CreepsMcCoasta. His heart nearly stopped. The thing knew his name. We were waiting for you. No, Edward shouted. He immediately took a metal amulet from his pocket and threw it towards the door. The amulet began to glow as it hit the ground. Intense, white light spread throughout the hall. The black hand immediately retreated back inside the door. And then suddenly, everything was silent. For a few moments, only the sound of their breathing could be heard. But then, CreepsMcCoasta felt something. Someone was standing behind him, very close. So close that he could feel cold breath on his neck. He slowly turned around, and his blood froze. Behind him stood a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old, dressed in a white dress. And her eyes were completely white. The girl slowly tilted her head and smiled. Then he whispered, "The door has already opened." At that moment, cracks began to appear all over the walls of the hall at once. And somewhere far away, in the darkness, the sound of something huge waking up was heard. The cracks in the walls of the underground hall were growing larger with each passing moment. Dust and stone particles began to spread into the air. CreepsMcCoasta's eyes were fixed on the white-eyed girl. She was still smiling, a smile that seemed not that of an innocent child, but of a terrible secret. Edward immediately took out a small silver pendant from his pocket and held it out to the girl. As soon as the pendant's light fell on the girl, her face changed for a moment. Her smile disappeared, and hatred began to flash in her eyes. "Back off," Edward shouted. The girl made a strange sound. The sound was not human. It seemed as if several different voices were speaking at once. Then suddenly, she disappeared into the air, just as if she had never been there. CreepsMcCoasta looked around in panic. Where did she go? Sweat had appeared on Edward's forehead. That's the problem. She didn't go anywhere. She's still here. Hearing this, a cold wave ran through CreepsMcCoasta's body. At that moment, there was a loud explosion.
Bang!
A long crack appeared on the giant black door in the middle of the hall. Edward's face turned pale. No. What happened? CreepsMcCoasta asked. Edward answered in a trembling voice. The first seal has been broken. The first seal? Edward fell silent. After a few moments, he sat down on the ground, as if he knew that time was running out. You have to know everything. CreepsMcCoasta sat down in front of him. Edward took a deep breath and began to tell his story. 15 years ago, I was a researcher. I researched mysterious places and ancient stories. One day I learned about this door. People said there was a passage to another world here. I didn't believe it. I came to find the truth, just like you. Edward's voice grew deeper. And then I opened the door. Silence fell. CreepsMcCoasta's hair stood on end. You really opened it? Edward bowed his head. Just a few inches. But that was enough. Something came out that day. What? Edward looked at the black door of the hall before answering. Then he said softly, "His name is Malgor." As soon as he heard this name, strange whispers began to echo in the walls of the hall. as if someone had named something that should never have been called. CreepsMcCoasta felt fear sink deep into his heart for the first time. "Who is Malgor?" Edward replied. "He is the king of this other world, a being who wanted to enter the world of humans thousands of years ago. The ancients built this door to stop him, and then imprisoned him with 7 seals." CreepsMcCoasta asked immediately, "And now?" Edward pointed to the crack in the black door. "Now the first seal has been broken. If the other 6 seals were broken..." He couldn't finish the sentence, because at that moment the entire hall shook violently. A second crack appeared, then a third. A terrifying roar was heard from behind the door. A roar that was enough to shake a person's mind. CreepsMcCoasta put his hands over his ears, but the sound was still echoing inside his mind. And then, strange scenes began to appear before him. He saw himself standing in a devastated world. The sky was red. Thousands of corpses lay on the ground. Cities had been destroyed. And among those ruins stood a giant shadow, so huge that its head was higher than the clouds. Its 2 shining white eyes were fixed on the entire world. And then the shadow slowly began to look at him. CreepsMcCoasta's heart nearly stopped. That shadow. Malgor. Suddenly the scene ended. CreepsMcCoasta was back in the hall. He was drenched in sweat. "What was that?" Edward replied immediately. "You saw him." "Who?" "Malgor." CreepsMcCoasta's hands began to tremble. "He actually exists." Edward nodded silently. At that moment, someone's footsteps were heard from the other end of the hall. Knock, knock, knock. The 2 of them immediately turned and looked. Several shadows were emerging from the darkness. First 1, then 2, then 10, then 20. Dozens of white-eyed creatures were entering the hall. And, in the midst of all this, the same little girl appeared again. This time, she wasn't smiling. She was looking straight at CreepsMcCoasta. Then she slowly raised her hand towards the door and whispered, "The second seal is about to break." Suddenly, there was a loud explosion on the black door. A new crack appeared, and from within that crack, 2 giant white eyes appeared. Those eyes were not those of a human, animal, or creature. They were the eyes of Malgor, and for the first time, she was seeing the world of humans. Malgor's giant white eyes were peering through the crack in the door. The entire underground hall was shaking. Stones were falling from the walls, and with each passing moment, the crack was getting bigger. CreepsMcCoasta stood still in his place. He felt as if those eyes were only looking at him. Only him. As if Malgor had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. Suddenly, the white-eyed girl stepped forward. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the hall. Knock, knock, knock. Behind her, dozens of creatures stood silently. No movement, no sound, only white eyes. The girl stopped a few steps away from CreepsMcCoasta. "You've finally arrived," she said softly. Her voice was different from before. It no longer sounded like a child's voice, as if several people were speaking at once. CreepsMcCoasta gathered her courage. "Who are you?" The girl was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. "I have been known by many names, but thousands of years ago, my name was Elijah." Edward's face immediately turned pale. "Impossible!" he almost screamed. "Elio is dead." The girl nodded slowly. "Yes, I was dead, but he brought me back." She pointed to the black door. "Malgor." CreepsMcCoasta felt her body temperature drop. Elijah continued. 2,000 years ago, I was one of the 7 guards who imprisoned Malgor. But I died in captivity, and when my spirit was weakened, Malgor found me. He made me his." Silence fell. CreepsMcCoasta was trying to understand. "If you were the protector, then why are you helping him now?" A strange sadness appeared in Elijah's white eyes. "Because I have no choice now. I am his prisoner." Suddenly, the hall shook again. Another explosion at the door. The second seal had broken. At that moment, all the torches in the hall went out. Darkness. Complete darkness. Only the red light that came from the crack in the door remained. And then, a voice was heard. The voice was neither male nor female. Not human. CreepsMcCoasta. All the creatures in the hall knelt down together. Elijah also bowed his head. Only CreepsMcCoasta stood. "Why are you calling me?" he asked, daring himself. There was silence for a few moments. Then the voice rang out again. "Because the door can't open without you." Hearing this, CreepsMcCoasta's steps staggered. "What do you mean?" Edward's face had turned white with fear. "Oh no," he whispered. That's why they wanted to bring you here." CreepsMcCoasta immediately looked at him. "What do you know?" Edward said tremblingly. "One of the 7 guardians survived. His lineage is not extinct. His descendants are still here today." CreepsMcCoasta's heart began to beat faster. And Edward's eyes locked on him. "You belong to the same race." The entire hall fell silent. CreepsMcCoasta felt as if time had stopped. "No, that's not possible." Elijah raised his head for the first time. "It's true. You are the heir to the last guardian. The power of the last seal is in your blood." Malgor's terrifying laughter echoed from behind the door. "And soon that power will be mine." At that moment, CreepsMcCoasta felt a sharp burning sensation on his arm. He screamed in pain. He rolled up his sleeve, and his blood froze. A strange mark was appearing on his skin. A circle, with 7 lines drawn inside it. 2 of the lines had turned red, just like 2 broken seals. Elijah looked at the mark, and his face changed color. "This is happening very quickly." "What?" "When all 7 lines turn red, the door will open completely." Suddenly, a strong jolt was felt inside the hall. The ground began to crack. New cracks appeared in the walls. And then, a large part of the ceiling of the hall collapsed. But what was visible from there? Everyone fell silent after seeing it, because there was no sky above. Instead, there was a red sky. The same red sky that CreepsMcCoasta had seen in his terrifying vision. The blood drained from Edward's face. "No, the other world has begun to enter our world." At that moment, thousands of people screamed from somewhere far away, as if something terrible had begun to happen to the whole world. Elijah looked up at the sky and said softly, "It's no longer possible to go back." The crack in the door widened further, and for the first time, part of Malgor's face was visible. A giant black face, one of whose eyes was as big as the entire house. He looked at CreepsMcCoasta and smiled. "Finally, I'm meeting you." At that moment, the 3rd line in the mark on CreepsMcCoasta's arm also turned red, and a memory entered his mind that was not his own. He saw an ancient war, 7 guardians, Malgor, and a truth, after knowing which, he might never be the same. As the 3rd line of the mark on CreepsMcCoasta's arm turned red, terrifying scenes began to run through his mind. He was no longer in the underground hall. At least he didn't feel like it. Another world had opened up before him. The sky was black. Fire was raining down on the ground. Destruction was everywhere. Mountains were crumbling. The seas were boiling. And millions of people were screaming. In the middle of this apocalyptic scene, 7 people stood. They had strange weapons in their hands, and golden light was emanating from their bodies. CreepsMcCoasta understood immediately. These were the 7 guardians. In front of them was a giant shadow, so large that its body was higher than the clouds. Malgor, the same entity whose name had become a symbol of fear for thousands of years. The war had begun. Light and darkness collided. The earth began to shake. The sky began to crack. And then the 7 guardians gathered their power in one place. A great door came into being, and Malgor was pushed inside it. But at the last moment, something unexpected happened. Malgor looked at one of the guardians before he was imprisoned, and smiled. A smile that was full of hatred. Then he said, "You think you've won? I will live in your blood." In the next moment, a part of his dark power entered the body of this guardian. The scene ended abruptly. CreepsMcCoasta gasped and returned to reality. His eyes widened in fear. "Oh God." Edward immediately approached him. "What did you see?" CreepsMcCoasta's voice was trembling. "Malgor. He wasn't completely imprisoned. He left a part of his power inside a guard." The hall fell silent. Elijah's face became serious. "So, you've seen the truth." "What truth?" Elijah said slowly. "One of the 7 guards was contaminated. A part of Malgor had migrated into his blood." CreepsMcCoasta's heart nearly stopped beating. "And that guard?" Elijah's gaze locked directly with his. "Your ancestor was." Silence. A terrible silence. "No, that's a lie." "I wish it were." Elijah replied. "That's why Malgor is looking for you. Your blood has the power to close the door. And to open it too." Suddenly, the entire hall shook. A terrifying roar was heard from behind the door. Malgor was growing stronger than ever. At that moment, a scream was heard. Edward fell to the ground in pain. "Edward!" CreepsMcCoasta ran towards him. But the sight he saw made his blood run cold. Edward's skin was starting to turn black. His eyes were turning white. "What is happening?" Edward spoke with difficulty. I can't stop it for long." "Who?" Edward raised his head. And for the first time, his eyes turned completely white. "To Malgor." CreepsMcCoasta took a step back. Elijah immediately took out his locket. But it was too late. Edward screamed loudly, and black smoke began to come out of his body. Then, he began to change. His hands began to lengthen. His bones began to crack. His face began to take on an inhuman shape. In a few moments, Edward was no longer human. He had become like those white-eyed creatures. CreepsMcCoasta's mind went blank. This is impossible. Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes.
"No."
This is the truth. Edward didn't survive 15 years ago. He died the day he opened the door. Malgor was just using his body. Hearing this, CreepsMcCoasta felt as if the ground had gone from under his feet.
So this whole time,
He had been traveling with a dead person? Suddenly, the Edward-like creature raised its head and said in Malgor's voice, "You finally know the truth." Then it reached out its hand to CreepsMcCoasta. At that moment, Elijah threw the pendant at it. Intense light spread throughout the hall. The creature began to scream in pain and retreated, but the damage was done. Another crack appeared in the door. The 4th seal broke. The 4th line on CreepsMcCoasta's arm also turned red. Now 4 of the 7 seals were gone. Malgor's terrible laughter echoed from behind the door. "Halfway is over. Soon I will be free." At that moment, an ancient stone wall in the far corner of the hall suddenly collapsed. Behind it was a hidden room, and inside this room, an ancient chest was placed. The box bore the same mark as CreepsMcCoasta's arm. Elijah's eyes widened in surprise. "Impossible. This is the box of the last guardian. It contains the secret that could destroy Malgor forever." But at that moment, a giant hand reached out from behind the door. And for the first time, Malgor's full voice echoed throughout the hall. "Don't let him reach the box." Dozens of white-eyed creatures emerged from the darkness and rushed towards CreepsMcCoasta. Dozens of white-eyed creatures were running towards CreepsMcCoasta from the darkness. The sound of their footsteps echoed throughout the hall. Knock, 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 as if death itself was moving towards him. Malgor's giant hand was now halfway out of the crack in the door. His long black fingers were breaking the stones like clay. With each passing moment, the door was weakening. "Get to the box," Elijah shouted with all his might. CreepsMcCoasta immediately ran. There was about 50 feet between him and the box, but the creatures were also moving in the same direction. The first creature reached him. He extended his long black hand towards his shoulder. At that moment, Elijah appeared in front of him. Golden light shot from his hand. The creature fell back with a painful scream. "Hurry up." CreepsMcCoasta kept running. The entire hall was shaking behind him. Stones were falling from above. The door was breaking, and Malgor's laughter echoed continuously. Finally, he reached the box. It was made of ancient black metal. It had strange markings engraved on it. As soon as he touched the box, the mark on his arm began to glow. The box opened automatically. There were only 3 things inside: an ancient sword, an old book, and a letter on which was written a single name: CreepsMcCoasta. A cold wave ran through his body. The letter seemed centuries old. But how could his name be written on it? With trembling hands, he opened the letter. Only a few lines were written inside. If you are reading this, it means Malgor has returned. And you are the last guardian. We had reserved our power for you. The decision is now in your hands. The door may close, or it may open forever. But remember, the real enemy is not always what lurks in the darkness. Sometimes the enemy is within you. The letter ended. CreepsMcCoasta picked up the book. As he opened it, hundreds of golden words began to float in the air. And then, a powerful light spread around his body. Thousands of memories began to enter his mind. Ancient wars, the 7 guardians, Malgor, and the secret that had been hidden for thousands of years. CreepsMcCoasta suddenly fell silent. He had seen the truth. Malgor was never a complete enemy. Rather, thousands of years ago, humans themselves had invaded the other world. And that war had given birth to Malgor.
Hatred, greed,
And destruction combined to give him existence. Malgor was actually the embodiment of human darkness. That's why he couldn't be completely killed. As long as hatred existed within humans, Malgor would live on in some form. Oh God, CreepsMcCoasta whispered. At that moment, Malgor's voice echoed. Now you know the truth. I cannot be destroyed. I am also present within you. Another explosion at the door. The 5th seal broke. The 5th line on CreepsMcCoasta's arm turned red. Now only 2 seals remained. Elijah was fighting the creatures, but she was weakening. One creature attacked her, another, then a third. Elijah fell to the ground. CreepsMcCoasta, she screamed. Now, decide, or it's all over. CreepsMcCoasta picked up the sword in the box. As he grabbed it, a golden light spread throughout the hall. All the creatures stopped. Even Malgor fell silent, for this was the sword of the last guard, the only weapon that could close the door, or break it forever. But at that moment, a terrible thing happened. Black smoke began to rise from Elijah's body. Her white eyes began to glow even brighter. She began to scream in pain. No. Her voice was trembling. He's controlling me. Malgor started laughing. She was always mine. Eliah's body slowly began to change. She was becoming more and more like those creatures. She looked at CreepsMcCoasta one last time, and for the first time, tears appeared in her eyes. Forgive me. Then she took out the same silver locket from her pocket and threw it at CreepsMcCoasta. Close the door, even if it means sacrificing myself for it. In the next moment, Elia was completely plunged into darkness and transformed into a terrifying creature. All the walls of the hall began to shake. The 6th seal on the door also broke. The 6th line on CreepsMcCoasta's arm turned red. Now only one last seal remained, and half of Malgor's body had come out of the door. His giant eye was fixed directly on CreepsMcCoasta. Now the final stage begins. A great golden sphere appeared on the floor of the hall, and the sword of the last guardian began to shine brighter than ever. CreepsMcCoasta knew the next decision would change the fate of the entire world. The hall was shaking. The walls were crumbling. Stones were falling from the ceiling, and the great black door had almost completely collapsed. Malgor's giant body was slowly entering the human world. His white eyes were shining like stars. His very presence was fearsome. CreepsMcCoasta stood there, holding a golden sword in his hand. The 6 lines of the mark on his arm had turned red. Only one last line remained. He knew this was the last moment. Either the door would close forever, or the world would change forever. Malgor's echoing voice echoed throughout the hall. Why are you fighting? You know who I am. You know where I came from. CreepsMcCoasta remained silent. I am your hatred. I am your fear. I am your darkness. If you destroy me, you'll have to destroy yourself too. At that moment, all those scenes reappeared in CreepsMcCoasta's mind.
wars,
Hatred,
greed,
deception, and the destruction caused by humans. He understood. Malgor was not completely lying. He was indeed born from the darkness of humans, but that did not mean that he should be set free. Suddenly, Elijah's voice was heard lying on the floor.
Weak.
Breaking. Door. Close it. CreepsMcCoasta looked at him. Elijah was still alive, but very weak. The darkness was slowly destroying his body. I will save you, CreepsMcCoasta shouted. Elijah smiled faintly. No. Some sacrifices cannot be taken back. Saying this, he pointed to the locket. The same silver locket. Now it was glowing with golden light. CreepsMcCoasta picked it up. As he touched the locket, a final memory entered his mind. He saw the 7 guards. And then he saw a scene that no one had ever seen before. The final seal was not placed on the door. The final seal, placed inside a human. And that human was the final guard.
His race.
His blood. And finally, CreepsMcCoasta. His face turned pale. Now he understood everything. The final seal was nothing. He was himself. Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes. That's why you were chosen. That's why Malgor wanted to bring you here. Because without breaking the last seal, he can't be completely free. Malgor laughed. Now he knows the truth. And now he knows that there's only one way to close the door. Silence. A terrible silence. CreepsMcCoasta asked softly, if I'm the last seal, then how can the door be closed? Elijah lowered his eyes. There was no need to answer. He understood. If the last seal sacrificed itself, then the door could be closed forever. But with that, he would be gone too. Malgor's laughter echoed throughout the hall. Decide, CreepsMcCoasta. Your life. Or your world. CreepsMcCoasta closed his eyes. He remembered his childhood, his life, his dreams, all the moments he had lived. Then he remembered the people who were alive in this world. People who didn't even know that their fate was being written in a deserted underground hall at that moment. He took a deep breath and smiled. My decision is made. Malgor's eyes narrowed. No. For the first time, fear sounded in his voice. CreepsMcCoasta gripped the sword tightly. Then he placed the pendant on his chest and stood in the center of the golden circle. Immediately, the entire space was filled with light. The last line on his arm began to glow. Malgor roared in anger. Stop. You don't know what you're doing. But it was too late. CreepsMcCoasta looked at Elijah one last time. She was crying.
But she was also smiling.
Thank you, he whispered. The next moment, CreepsMcCoasta buried his sword in the golden symbol in front of him. There was a huge explosion. A light burst out that turned the entire hall white. Malgor screamed in pain. The cracks in the door began to fill.
His body began to retract.
All the creatures with white eyes began to turn into smoke. Darkness also began to emanate from Elijah's body. She returned to her original form. Malgor shouted one last time. This is not over. As long as there is darkness in humans, I will return. And then, he disappeared.
The door closed.
Forever. Silence. There was only silence for several moments. Then the light slowly began to fade. Elijah looked around. The hall was ending. The door had turned to stone. The danger was over. But CreepsMcCoasta was not there. He was gone. With the last seal, a year later, the world had returned to normal. No one knew how much disaster had been averted. One evening, Elijah was sitting in an old library. Then he found a book. A new book. The title was CreepsMcCoasta, The Door That Never Opened. He opened the book in surprise. On the first page was a message. The darkness never completely ends, but as long as someone is willing to stand in front of it, hope lives on. Only a name was written at the bottom. CreepsMcCoasta. Tears began to flow from Elijah's eyes. And somewhere far away, a familiar whisper was heard in the air. The story isn't over yet.